Good afternoon again, everyone. Thank you for joining. If you've just arrived, please do write your name, the role that you currently play, whether you're a student or a lecturer, your institute, and the country that you're based in. Thank you. In the chat room, this is just so that we get a sense of who's here. And if you recognize a name, please go ahead and say hello to them via the chat. Welcome. I think we've got quite a large number of participants from all over Africa. Welcome from Ghana, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, and lots of other countries and institutes. Welcome. So we are right on the hour. I think we can start the session now. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome everyone to this grants writing workshop. My name is Vicky Nembaware. And this is actually a collaboration between the African Society and G2MC, and it's supported by the International Congress of Human Genetics, which is going to be happening from next week, in person and virtually here in Cape Town. This workshop was meant to actually be done in person, but due to some logistical issues, we've taken it online, which is fantastic because now we can have lots of participants join the meeting. So just some ground rules. Only the panel and presenters will be allowed to switch on their videos. We request that participants type questions, and you can add your name and position or affiliation to the question to give context. Moderators will choose questions. Our moderator for today is going to be Professor Gada Kama. She's a medical geneticist from Egypt, and she's really passionate about training, so she'll be moderating this session together with Professor Yagan from Australia. We'll also have some polls in the session, so please do take them if you can. So before we start, I thought we could just highlight the International Congress of Human Genetics, which is happening here in Cape Town from the 22nd to the 26th. The abstract submission, unfortunately, has closed, but if you're unable to travel to Cape Town, we understand that there are many visa requirements for a lot of participants. You can join online. There's a small fee to join online and attend some of the sessions virtually. I would also like to highlight the Young Investigator Research Day and Cultural Networking Evening. That will be happening a day before the Congress, which is on the 21st. We've got the Research Day happening at the University of Cape Town Upper Campus in the Sarah Bartman Hall, and we'll have a cultural dinner or networking dinner at Moyo Restaurant in Kirstenbosch. For those who cannot attend in person, especially the Research Day, you're welcome to sign in online, and you can then attend virtually. I also wanted to highlight the G2MC 7th International Conference that will be happening in Switzerland in October. It's a really great place to interact with people who are working in genomic medicine and implementation of genomic medicine globally. Just to highlight as well, they've got an Early Career Investigators Forum, which is similar to the Young Investigators Forum, and their oral abstract submission deadline is on the 22nd. So we urge you all to apply and hopefully get some travel grants for that. Just to give recap for those who didn't attend the first session, we had the first session on planning, how to effectively plan a grant development and submission. We also highlight some tools and templates and coordination of the grant development process. We also looked at the research strategy. Nikki Tiffan did that. And then this session today is going to be focusing on the budget. We have over 600 participants who have subscribed to this workshop, and we are hoping that pending availability of funds, we'll get small seed grants available for workshop participants to apply so that they can actually hone in their skills in a practical sense. Thank you so much. I think I will hand over to Professor Gada Kama, who's going to be moderating to take over introducing the presenters and also chairing the session. Thank you very much.
So given that we have...
Seems Professor Gada is still trying to join. So in the meantime, I will just introduce Professor Yegan, who is based at James Cook University in Australia, who's got a wide range of experience and expertise in grant development. He's affiliated to the G2MC consortium, and we're very happy for him to be opening up this session. And he will be sharing some slides, which he will share from his end. And I'll hand over to you, Professor Yegan. Thank you for making time for this workshop.
Thank you, Vicky. And good afternoon, all. I'm just clear my throat here. So I'm going to try and talk to you a little bit about grants and especially budgets, which is what I was asked to do. And in fact, I'm going to tell you also how I, as a reviewer, often use budgets to tell somebody that their grant application is not very good, which is sort of a sneaky way of not offending somebody, but telling them that their grant doesn't have a chance. So I've had a long history of pulling grants. I've had some 50 grants in total. I'm also a grant referee, and I'm going to tell you about 4 grants that I've reviewed this year and where the budget came in very specifically. One of the things that I think is important as you think about your grants is you want to know what goes on in science, and especially if you're younger, that means doing a lot of work and reading the literature and keeping up with the literature in your field. But many journals now are looking for editorial people from developing countries and also younger people. And so I'm involved in the journal called Human Genomics and Frontiers in Genetics and Frontiers in Pharmacology. And so if any of you have an interest in joining the editorial board, let me know and we'll see what we can do there. And as was mentioned, I do play a role in G2MC. I sit on the steering committee, also chair some other committee for the Human Genome organization. And the reason why I bring this up, you also want to be a part of your professional society that is relevant to you, for example, the African Society for Human Genetics, to understand what's going on in the field, because when you submit a grant, the grant really needs to be at the frontier of science. So when thinking about grants, don't be afraid to try new things. Don't do more of the same. People want to see new stuff, and part of doing science is that you want to have fun, and fun is discovering new things. Mentoring is important and intensely personal. I'm happy to mentor and regularly mentor people, but I don't believe in sort of spreadsheet-based setups. You want to talk to people and see that you click, because mentoring is so personal. So when you're writing your grants, you want to seek advice from mentors and senior colleagues on both your manuscripts and grant proposals. The constructive criticism is far better than getting either your manuscript or paper or your grant rejected. So take them seriously, but also follow your own nose and what you need to do. Now, when planning grants, seek out great collaborators to get along with and ask them early. Obviously, if you want to have an academic career that has a research component, you want to apply for and get grants. And I think we all should be good citizens, both at our institutions, but also in professional societies, journals, and so on. And last but not least, as important as science is, there is a life outside of science. So specifically about grants, you cannot start the day before the deadline, especially if it's a big grants, usually starting to plan 6 months, if not a year ahead. May sound crazy, but my advice to you is start early and lock in collaborators, especially if you have some high profile colleagues, because they get asked a lot. And so if you can lock them in early, that'll help you a lot. It is also a good idea to keep your ego in check and sort of collaborate with people. You don't want to lose your own ideas, but you also want to be collaborative. Getting constructive criticism early on and considering it is important because it will improve your grant proposal and revise your grant as necessary based on the feedback you're getting. Appearances matter. You wouldn't believe how many grants I see that are page after page after page where people try to cram in as many characters as possible. Of course, they want to tell people about their exciting science, but looking at page after page after page doesn't look great. Make sure that the different sections of the grant are easily identifiable. So have a good abstract, have overall goals, have specific aims, a clear research plan, and impact or significance statement, whatever your agency wants. So including display items, whether that's figures, for example, of preliminary data, tables, or so on, just to break up the monotony of type is a good idea, but they also help to illustrate the points that you make and actually save you some text by actually showing stuff graphically. The track record must be absolutely relevant to the proposal, so make sure that you have publications and experience in the field and of the stuff that you want to do. The timeline must be realistic, and I was asked to speak specifically about budgets, which I will do in a sec. It is my contention that budgets all too often are an afterthought, and a lot of people stumble over that. And I have, as I mentioned before, used the critique of budgets to tell somebody that their grant is just not going to get funded without using those exact words, but you basically tell people you don't know what you're doing. So, unfortunately, budgets all too often an afterthought that can frankly sink a grant proposal. Make sure you understand the granting agency's policy on grant funding and budgets, and so that applies to the budget as you write it. So what costs are allowed? What is the indirect cost for overhead? Personnel, what can you put on? What can you not put on? Inflation in many countries now is an issue. Many granting agencies will have guidelines for what your cost of living allowance may be. As you think about your grant and do the application, but also as you then do your research, many granting agencies will allow you to carry over or carry forward funds. You need to understand what the rules are, what percentage, for example, can you carry over. You need approval from the granting agency to carry forward budget items. Can you extend your grants for a year or something at a no cost extension, then use those carry forward funds or carried over funds? So that applies as you are in the grant, but you need to know that as you start the grant or before you even start the grant, because it'll help you to plan whether you have a 3-year grant that you can then extend for an additional year, or a 5-year grant for an additional year with your carry forward funds. Justify everything that needs to be justified in your budgets. Don't assume that the referees will just tick off on the budget. Like I said, I use budgets to send messages to people without hopefully offending them. Your numbers must be documentable and realistic. So I mentioned to you that I've looked at 4 grants from a country that is not Australia, this year. 3 of them came in exactly to the cent at the maximum allowable amount. And so, people were playing around with the numbers. One came within a hair of that maximum amount. So that's okay to do, but that tells the referee immediately that you're just basically fitting the budget into what is allowed by the granting agency, and may not necessarily reflect the work that you're doing. So as I mentioned, I've used as a referee a budget critique to send a clear message. So one of the things that I've seen in one of those 4 grants that I mentioned is that the budget contains requests for 2 meetings and 1 publication, so the cost for that publication. Now, in the text of the grant application, the only thing that was ever mentioned was the publication. The 2 meetings were not mentioned, and they were not justified in the budget. So there was clearly a disconnect between the body of the grant and the budget. When I told you that budgets all too often are afterthoughts, you have the different parts of the grant, and the budget is one part of the grant, and you try to fit whatever maximum amount you have to whatever you need, and that usually does include, of course, absolutely correctly, attending meetings and publication costs, but you cannot forget to justify them and mention them in the grant proposal. They're part of your proposal, and they're part of your research program. You want to get funded by the funding agency. And then, as I mentioned, so you want to manage the grant budgets carefully once it is awarded. So I don't know how things work at your university, but in most places, you cannot spend any money on that grant until the money actually arrives at your institution, which may or may not be the starting date that you had written into your grant. More often than not, it'll be later than that. So you start hiring people only after the money arrived at your institution. So one of the reasons why you may have carried forward or carry over funds after year 1 that you want to carry into year 2, and then maybe year 3, and perhaps a no-cost extension in year 4, is that because you were unable to hire people right away because the money arrived late at your institution. So that's one of the things you can do, is request to carry forward funds because you couldn't hire people right away. So one of the things I thought I'd do at the end is show you a couple of pictures of the campus I'm on, but you can also see that there's an indigenous name for that. Yes, I can. Numabara, which is the indigenous, so in Australia, there are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, the people who were living in Australia before British folks arrived. And so they had about 300, if not more, languages. So one of the local languages here is Numabara, which means learning for tomorrow. I thought I'd leave this picture on for at least a moment and tell you that my preference is to make this session as interactive as possible. So I'm happy to look at questions in the chat once I get out of my slides, but I'm also happy for you if the chair allows that to ask questions directly. So thank you for your attention. I'd like to make this interactive as possible, so please feel free to ask whatever questions you want. And that shut everybody up.
Great. Welcome to Professor Gada, who is moderating this session. She's now joined, as I introduced her before, she's a medical geneticist based in Egypt, very passionate about training. So she's going to now moderate and introduce the other panelists. I'll hand over to you, Gada. Gada, are you online?
Yes, I'm online. Thank you, Vicky.
Fantastic.
I got over the technical problems. Thank you very much. Okay, it's my pleasure to be among you all today for this fantastic course. Actually, the first session was so impressive, and it's so nice to see so much involved in the second session. It's my pleasure to present the second presenter now, Professor Jürgen. But before presenting him, I would like to entitle you about how things are going to be. After our first presenter, we're going to have an icebreaker, 3 panelists who are going to have some kind of 3 minutes discussions, and then Professor Ambros will wrap the session, and then we'll have some questions and answers to the presenter and the panelists to finalize the session with. So please, Professor Jürgen, would you please start? We're very interested in learning about your experience in how to provide a good financial or budget for an important grant. Thank you very much. Please.
Yeah, thank you, Gara. So as I mentioned, one of the things in my presentation and in my slides, one of the things I often use budgets for is to send a message to grant applications that their grant isn't very good. And it's one way of not offending people. There might be something in their CV that tells them that they don't know what they're doing. There might be also stuff in their grant application itself that tells you that they don't know what they're doing. But the budget is a non-offensive way of telling people that they don't know what they're doing. So I see a question from Nikki, and I might just jump onto that. So she's asking about salaries. Now, salaries depends very much on the granting agency. So both in Australia and the US, there is the salary and then there are on costs. So this is like health insurance and so on. So it's not just the salary, it's also on costs, which in different countries might be different. For most grants, what you expect is that the PI will put in a certain amount of time. If you are a young investigator, it can be up to 50% of your time. If you're a seasoned investigator, anywhere between 5 to 25% might be okay. And in some places you can ask for salaries. In the US you can. In Australia, you cannot ask for salaries for people who are paid by the university because they're public institutions. Research associates you can put on, so these might be technicians, postdocs, graduate students, or postgraduate students, depending on the country you're in. Usually, if you're a young person, one additional person will be allowed on the grants. If the budget permits, you want to put the whole person, the whole salary on, but there might be restrictions on the budget and how to do that. But so if you're young, part of your salary may go on, and certainly part of your time would go on, and usually an additional person. So Hadisa, and if I butchered your name, please correct me. So for early career researcher grants, what you can usually put on is, of course, whatever you need for the work to be done. So that's materials, supplies, usually a meeting, 1 meeting per year, publication maybe every other year. As I mentioned, in terms of salaries, if allowable in your country, part of your salary might go on, but even if it's not part of your salary that goes on, you may have to put down what your time commitment will be. And for early career researchers, up to 50% is reasonable. And usually for a young person, one additional person. So technician, graduate students, postdocs usually once they're old, or senior might go on. Of course, one of the things that you need to decide is how you want to run your lab. If you want to run it with grad students, with postdocs, technicians. Let me go to Ikenna then and Michelle in a sec. Yes, what do you do if you do not get grants? So I don't know how this works in your country, but usually there are trigger words that tell you how close you were to the funding cutoff and how far away you are. If somebody says your grant is good, and the places where English is used where I hang out, so I'm in Australia and I used to live in the US, as you might be able to tell from my accent, good means you do not have a snowball's chance in hell of getting your grants funded. So if everything is good, again, they're not trying to offend you, but it means you're not going to get funded. And so there is no point in resubmitting. If you see words like outstanding and excellent, but didn't get funded, you were probably close to the funding line. And that means that putting in a resubmission and addressing the critiques is sensible. Now, of the 4 grants that I told you I just reviewed this year, one was a resubmission, and clearly I had not seen that grant before. And so they were responding to critique of someone else, not me. And so that might also happen, that you get critiques, and then someone else looks at it the next year and you may or may not get that grant because someone else has different ideas. Now, Michelle. So that's an excellent question about seed funding. So I think if you're a young investigator, there should be a progression from getting small grants or seed funding at your own institution from smaller agencies. So if I think back, the first grant I got was a Starter Scholar Award from the March of Dimes in the US, which was $50,000 a year, but it came with a title of Starter Scholar Award. And so helped me to get a position, but it was $50,000 a year, so it wasn't a lot of money. But as you go through these smaller grants of seed funding, you build up both a track record and attractive funding and of preliminary data to then go after bigger grants. So that is a strategy that I would definitely go after. Let's see. Lisa. So Lisa, are you asking me about additional funding that might become available? If so, if there is a call from the funding agency, then you should absolutely go for that. So I have had calls where you could put on additional people on grants because they wanted to fund particular people. So that will work. Most funding agencies will not allow you to ask for additional money, and you may have to rebudget within your grants to do the work. But usually you cannot ask for additional money. So one of the things I didn't tell you is about negotiated reductions. Sometimes the funding agency will reduce your funding because they don't have enough money. And it's called a negotiation, but what it really means is if they want to cut your budget at 20%, let's just say for the sake of argument, the choice you have is you want to get the grant, you're going to have to do the same work you have supposed to do with 20% less, or you don't get the grant. So usually that negotiated reduction means that you say, yes, I'll take less funding, but no, there is no additional money. Okay, any other questions? Yes. So multi-countries, yes. So the EU has done that. I should tell you that I have had NIH grants while I was in Australia. So that kind of stuff does happen. There are usually some bureaucratic issues that get in there. So for example, so speaking about NIH grants, for example, federal government in the US, the NIH, in other words, does not pay overheads to institutions outside of the US. So one of the things you may have to find out is if your institution allows you to accept a grant that carries no overhead. And so if you want the money, you may have to negotiate that with them. So Jean, jumping into grant funding. So that depends on your institution. If you can jump into grant funding as a postdoc, most institutions will require you to have a position at the institution that allows you to write grants and to manage them. So when I was a postdoc, at some point, I was kicked upstairs and called a lecturer. I remained in the same lab. I was paid exactly the same way, but I was called a lecturer, which means that I could apply for a grant, and I got that Stardust Scholar Award, and I moved to a different institution without grants. So the institutions I am familiar with, but that might be different in your particular institution, you can only apply for grants if you have a faculty position or academic staff position, but that may really depend on your institution. So Rahman, and I'm hoping I didn't butcher that again too much. So there are databases where you can search for funding. There are a bunch of databases. Some of you may have to subscribe to, or your institution may have to subscribe to. But if you're starting out, somebody asked before about seed funding, you really want to start with smaller grants, and they often tend to be very local. So if you're starting out, local might be your best way to go. And I've talked a lot now. Are there any additional questions that you folks might want to have, or comments you might want to make? And I should say, if you want to get in touch with me, please feel free to do so. I'm happy to help you if I can.
So it seems we don't have more questions or comments to Professor Jürgen. Would you like to give us more advice about budgeting, or something, that any points that that you would like to advise the audience about?
Well, like I said, so budgets often tend to be an afterthought, and they're incredibly important. I think it's also important that people understand what messages the referees are trying to send to you. If your proposal is close to being fundable, and then you should go in for a revision if you didn't get the grant, or if it's clear that you're not going to get funded. I'm going to put my email in the chat in a second. I guess you cannot raise his hand. Or her hand, I should say.
There are two more questions by Professor Stephen and by someone else.
So let's start with Havatsa, and again, I apologize if I butchered that name. So yes, the budgets will differ for early career researchers versus more senior people. So I would say that once we're talking national funding, so NIH, NHMRC, and those kind of granting agencies, I think the expectation for a young person is that you will have one additional person. For more seasoned people, you might ask for multiple people. So what I will tell you is that at some point in my life, I had an annual budget on grants alone, so annual budget of $1 million US per year, and I had 19 people in my lab. I knew most of their faces. I think I knew what most of them were doing, but that was a lot of people. So as you become more senior, you collaborate with people and you accumulate money, and so you have more people. But I think the expectation is to start out is that you need to establish your own lab, you need to establish your own track record. And so starting out with one additional person is what usually happens. Let's see, there was some other question. So different categories of budget. So you're going to have personnel. So we talked about what you can put down for your own salary or not. So in Australia, if you're at a public university, which I think all but two in Australia are public universities, you cannot put down your salary. But in the US, you could put down your salary. So it depends on the institution. And you can put down as a junior person, usually one person. Then, of course, there is materials and supplies. So this is lab supplies and so on. So if you're doing animal work, if you're doing clinical work, if it's clinical work, usually one annual meeting is allowable. The publication every second year or so will be reasonable. Equipment, once again, for younger people, you probably cannot put a lot of equipment down because people will assume you got that in your startup package. But as you move along in your career, you can put equipment on grants. But again, for a young person, I wouldn't advise to put a lot of equipment, if anything, on your grants. So the next question from Mangara is on online management. So I think anything that you can get your hands on is a good idea. And NIH clearly is interested in funding work in Africa. So I would certainly take an interest in what's going on there. Nikki. Let me see. So I agree. So I've told you before, budgets should not be an afterthought. It's something that can hang you, but usually it's a proxy for other problems in the grants. But so if you have a good budget, that is something that cannot hang you with. So having it worked out in detail and then maybe condensing it because that's what the funding agency wants from you is a good idea. And of course, it also helps you to plan for when you get the money, how are you going to spend the money? So having worked out how you want to spend the money, even if you then condense it for the application, allows you to then spend the money in a sensible way once you get your grants. Yes, multiple funding for a single project. So when I mentioned to you that at some point I had $1 million annually US for my lab, I was probably the PI of 2 or 3 of those grants. I was probably the co-PI of another 2 or 3 grants, and at least one of me got 2 center grants. So clearly you cannot have any overlap between your funding, between the grant that you apply for and existing funding. You always have to detail the overlap. And if there is any overlap, you can rest assured that the funding agency will cut your budget justifiably so because there shouldn't be any overlap. Now you have to, usually there is a section of the grant application where you list all of your other grants, whether funded or pending, and they will usually ask you whether there's overlap or not. And so ideally you're going to tell them there is no overlap and there are not going to be any issues. So how do you get multiple grants on sort of related matters? So so when I told you about how much money we had and how many people had in the lab, we're basically focused on genetics of prostate cancer, pharmacogenetics of prostate cancer, and also biochemistry of genetic variants. And so we were looking at a limited number of genes. But so there are several genes you can look at. You can look at the biochemistry, you can look at the variants in those genes, you can look at interactions of these genes. So you can see how all of a sudden you can have multiple grants on related subjects, but they're not overlapping. So that's how you can deal with that. So I wouldn't call this multiple funding for a single project. I would say it's multiple funding for a single lab with related projects. Now, budget template, each funding agency, Jean-Baptiste, will really have their own rules. So the general guideline is justify everything that you're asked for, justify it in sufficient detail that the referees believe that you know what you're doing. Of the 4 grant application that I've reviewed this year so far, I actually told one of the applicants that the budget was padded, which is probably not what you want to hear. And I said in this same vein that they might have been afraid of inflation, but you don't want to hear from a referee that your budget is padded, because that again is one of those code words that is bad news because you overinflated your budget. So can you tell us, Obaid, what's key element? So in any budget, so personnel, materials and supply, publications, meetings, travel costs, that kind of stuff is usually the categories that you're going to have. But again, each funding agency will have some guidelines that you're going to have to deal with.
Okay, I think we might thank you very much, Professor Richard here, and we hope you be available after the panelists to answer more questions, because the 3 panelists will now start some kind of ice-breaking discussion that might bring more questions, open new things that the audience might want to know about. So we're moving to our 3 panelists, Doctors Michelle Skeleton, Chigun Fatumo, and Hannah, to enlighten us about as they are all, the 3 of them, experienced in grant writing. They might break the ice with some experiences about how things they faced maybe during their grant writings and stuff like that. Would you like to start, Michelle? If Michelle is not ready, would she go on?
Okay, so thank you very much, Gada. I've been asked to talk about grants management in multiple countries. So I'm going to start by saying that success rates for getting a grant is very low, and that's why the management has to be done appropriately. For example, on the average, so you get like maybe 10% success rate. So that means that 1 out of 10 grants will be successful. So that doesn't mean that your grants will be like that. There are people that have maybe more than 50% success rate or 80% success rate or more. So, or generally, success rate for many grants is about 10%. So that is how important it is that things are done very well to be successful. So that's the first thing to say. So the second thing is that where you have grants that are being successful, so there's need for that grant to be managed very well. So in my own case, I have grants at the MRC Uganda, which is Uganda. I have grants at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK. So previously, I have participated in the grant in Nigeria, and this grant has to be managed very well. So I would start by giving some background about my organization at the MRC Uganda. So the organization is based in Uganda, but technically it's a UK organization. So that makes it a bit complicated. So MRC Uganda is now, since February of 2018, part of London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Also in Uganda, we also have another organization called the Uganda Virus Research Institute, UVRI, which is purely African institution. So that means that when we make an application for a grant, so the first thing is to check the policy of the funder, whether they want an African institution to apply or whether any institution can apply from all over the world. So if the funder is insisting that it must be an African institution, so we apply from UVRI, which is the Uganda Virus Institute. Most of the time, many of the funder also we allow MRC Uganda, which is based in Uganda, but part of the UK institution, to be applied as an African institution. So that's very clear on how to make that application. So if you want to manage your budget, so the first thing I would say is that there are very many administrative officer that needs to be your best friend. At the MRC Uganda, we have the what we call the Research Support Office, RSO, at the MRC Uganda. In London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, also we have the Research Administrative and Support Office. So these offices needs to be your best friend because they are going to be people that will help you manage the grants. And they don't start managing that grant from when it is awarded. So you start getting them along when you want to make the application for the grant, because they are the people that will tell you that so salary of a postdoc is going to cost you XYZ US dollars. Apart from what the salary of a postdoc is, they also tell you an additional money to add to that, because you don't just pay people what their salary is. You also have to think about, so the postdoc needs to pay tax. The postdoc needs to get some pension. So those extra money has to be added. Sometimes they call it overhead. Sometimes they call it administrative charges. As these people also are going to be telling you that, so you need to have this money because the postdoc, when they come, they need to have a laptop to work with. We need to get some estate charges for the postdoc. They need to have an office that they're going to be working with. They'll be making photocopy and all those things that you don't think about. So that is why I said the Research Support Office are going to be your best bets to be their friend. So that is one. Number two is that many times some grants are going to have sub-award. For example, you have a grant that is awarded to MRC Uganda, but you have collaborator, let's say at the University of Cambridge or at the University of Cape Town. So you are going to be responsible in making sub-award to this organization. So again, the research office are going to be helping you to make sub-award. So the first thing will be to put together what is called research agreements. So you have to be a research agreement between your institution and that institution where the sub-award is going to them. So again, these people are going to be supporting you with that, with a legal team, so that things are done done properly in terms of grants, in terms of budgets being distributed very well between those institutions. That also is very similar with fellowship. Fellowship is a bit different from grants. Fellowship is mainly a personal grant for you. So the funder is mainly funding you. For example, if you have a Welcome Fellowship, so the funder is giving you salary 100%, and they also funding part of your project. Whereas grant is a bit different. So grants, most of the funder, they're not going to be giving you 100% salary as a PI. They're probably giving you maybe 5% or 10% or 20%, and they are mainly funding your project. So that is a bit different. So whether it's fellowship or grant, it is important to understand that the procedure carried along your research office at the beginning, when you want to apply, what you want to add into your budget, including cost for laptop, cost for office space, cost for say conferences, cost for publication, and every of those costs has to be justified. So you ask them again to look at it. They look at it and they say it is fine. If your university is asking for overhead charge of 10%, 20%, that has to be added. So that the grants can run successfully. Because if you are successful with one grant to the end, in running it, you are likely going to be successful in running those other grants that may come along. So that's what I need to say. In my own grants, the way I manage them, I work with other institutions. My group is kind of not a typical standard group, because we have member of our group from different institutions. So they're mainly students that we support from Makara University, or postdocs that we hire directly. We have some students that we support them for supervision, peer supervision from either in Nigeria or in Mali. So we have some support, some collaboration with those institutions where we have a grant, and the students have some funding that we added to their grant to support the student. So that is what I would say for now. If there are any question, I'm very happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shagun. I hope Michelle is ready by now. Michelle? Dr. Skeleton? No? Skeleton, no? Okay, Ms. Hannah, are you ready to take over?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. And thank you, Segunen, for taking a lead on this. Oh, for me, my starting point is that there's really no magic in doing a good budget. It has to be systematic. It has to be very well thought out. And I will build on what Segun has said, in that you need to make the administrative, most universities or research institutions call this office either a grant management unit or a research management unit. Where I would say you start is, once you get your approvals internally to apply for the proposal, then that's the point at which you get allocated resources within those units to help you, one, in interpreting the guidelines and requirements from whichever institution has sent out the call for proposal. In there, I would expect you are assigned a grants management specialist. And why you need to make this person your good friend is that this is the person who will actually sit down to do the numbers for you or with you. And they are the people who will be able to read the budget guidelines that have been provided by the different institutions that have sent out the calls for proposal. There's no one way of doing it. One institution will have different budget guidelines from another institution, and that is from experience of one being an organization. And maybe I can step back and say I work for Science for Africa Foundation. It's a continental Pan-African organization that funds research in the continent in 3 thematic areas: climate sciences, health, and agriculture. Integrated science, that's how we do our calls for proposal. So on one end, I apply for grants from institutions that give us resources, which we downstream to researchers and institutions within the African continent. So I have experience both of receiving budget proposals and also applying for the same budget. So I will talk from both perspectives as we go along. So for me, you do need somebody who really understands and can be able to interpret the guidelines for you, even though you can read the certain financial terms that you may not get, they should be able to interpret those for you. A good starting point is, once you do your technical proposal, they should be able to bring out what activities are required to go into the budget. Some organizations will provide for you a template, a budget template, and again, they need to be able to sit down and understand how the template works and be able to put budgets in the right places. Some funders will give you a template that has the budget headings. Others will leave it blank for you to categorize your costs. So it's very important that you have somebody who really understands those competencies and is able to categorize costs as they are required. So you therefore need to have somebody who is competent enough to be able to do that. The other bit I can say is that proper categorization of costs is really important. Your internal guidelines may be slightly different from the funders' guidelines. For example, some institution, what they consider as direct costs and what another organization considers as a direct or an indirect cost could be different. So you need somebody who is able to categorize cost in the right category, either as direct or indirect. You need somebody who understands internal requirements. So for example, if your institution charges administrative costs, that person needs to know those costs needs to be budgeted for and included in the budget. And you can only do this if you have somebody who understands internal policies and requirements when you're making a budget. Also somebody who understands allowable and non-allowable costs as you do the budget. And again, funders or those who send out calls for proposal will give you categories of costs that are allowable and those that are not allowable. You need to make clarifications. I have seen, or rather from my experience, Science for Africa Foundation, when we do a call for proposal, we allow people to send in questions or clarifications within a period of time, and then we will either respond directly or we will gather all these questions different applicants are asking, consolidate them, and then we have a workshop where we answer all those questions, and everybody who has interest in applying for that grant can ask the different questions or clarifications that are needed. These workshops could be 1 or 2, depending on the period the call is open for. Another thing you need to do in your budget is actually show value for money. Every funder wants to know that every dollar counts. You therefore need to show how you're applying the 4 E's. We call them the 4 E's. 1, it's economy, efficiency, equity, and I forget the 4th one. There are 4 E's that you need to show in your budget you're following, such that the funder is convinced that you're considering other aspects of the budget that are not just monetary, but also your value addition to the budget. So for example, if you're in an institution that is providing you space and they're not charging you, you need to have somebody be able to interpret that as a contribution to the grant application. That way, whoever is reviewing the budget can see that beyond you asking for money from them, your organization is equally contributing to your success as a researcher. And the other bit is, for example, if your time commitment in the budget is not 100%, you can show where the other funding source is coming from. That way, it shows you're fully covered within the year, and it gives comfort and more credibility to your budget that you're not reliant on this grant, maybe 100%. And the other bit you can do is show those contribution in kind that your organization is making, nobody will see them from a value proposition, but if you're able to put them within your proposal as what you're contributing, it increases the value proposition you're making to the budget application. And then have a very detailed budget narrative that is very transparent. You need to provide a lot of clarity on costs. If you're budgeting for travel, do your research. How much does it cost? How many trips per year? What is the essence of the travel? So be detailed in how you're providing the budget narrative. I'm not talking about the technical narrative. I'm talking about the budget narrative. It has to be very detailed so that you don't have a lot of questions from the funder asking for clarification. Be forthright with information so that they're able to answer some of the questions they sometimes ask as they do the evaluation. I will stop there for now and open to have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Michelle has joined us again, so we can pass to Michelle now.
Awesome, thank you, Gada. Thank you, Vicky, Johan, and Hannah, and Segun. You can see me. So I will be quick because I know we're sort of on the hour almost. So yeah, I was asked to speak about capacity building and administrative grants as opposed to research research grants. And in this I would speak more on biomedical research grants because that's also my background. So for the type of grant that I'm involved in, first of all, with the application, they would indicate you what funding is available, and you would have to stick, and the amount of funding, and you would have to stick within that budget, right? So when you're preparing your budget. So I'm just going to talk about the type of grant that I'm involved in. So it's capacity building and administration, and it was really to support the genomics network across Africa. So to shift that genomics community in Africa to create cohesion. And for that, I needed, this type of grant would be really personnel heavy. So I would have in my group 4 to 5 personnel. So because it's really administration, fiscal management, and this training component as well, right? So we would also support, need at least teamwork tools like things like Active Collab or Zoom or other tools like that. And then also we would have a big component as facilitating face-to-face meetings and also online meetings. So the big component of what we do is also, of course, to support the next generation of scientists within the group. So there comes the training and support for those, all of the activities around training early career scientists, emerging career scientists, and also study coordinators and that type of thing. So if you just think about the budget breakdown, if you compare an administrative capacity building grant to a research grant, I would say from my experience, 40% of the grant would be on salaries. For the 4 to 6 personnel, 40% of the grant, the budget at least would be for conferencing, workshops, and so on, travel and accommodation. And the way we work across Africa is we want to work with the local trainers, the local people at the universities. So to have that flexibility to be able to engage those people and pay if necessary for their services. And then I think 20%, so that's 40%, and 20% would be for running expenses at your institution and covering other items like computers, which are quite something we need in this type of grant. And then if you think about a research grant, I would think that, because I've never had a research grant, I would think that 70% of the funds would be for reagents and large pieces of equipment, if you were very well-established research group. And I would think that maybe 20% of that would to contribute to a postdoc salary, and then some of it also to a PI. And then just for the things to look out for, I think we all spoke about, Jürgen spoke about inflation, considering inflation for salaries over a 5-year period, if your grant is a 5-year period, considering bonuses as well, and then of course the exchange rate. And then for us as the coordinating center to consider regional costs of things, because there's a big cost variance across Africa, West Africa being very expensive, South and East Africa not so much, and North Africa it varies also across. So that's what I can contribute. Yeah, I'm open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, Segun, and Hannah, for covering almost everything. I think we'll move to Ambroise now and his closing remarks, because we're so past the time. So please, Ambroise, would you take it from here?
Yeah, thank you, Ghada, and thanks everyone for inviting me to give a few remarks at the end of this very important session. My name is Ambroise Wonkam. Today I'm representing the African Society of Human Genetics as the president and the host of the International Federation. We will be all meeting in person in a couple of days in Cape Town. I was trained as a medical doctor in Cameroon, where I was born, as a geneticist in Switzerland. And I have worked as faculty in Switzerland, in Cameroon, in South Africa, and I'm currently the director of the McKissick Nathan's Institute of Genetic Medicine and the Department of Genetic Medicine at the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. I will probably give a few remarks on, first of all, my scientific journey and what I may have considered being successful and what have been the most important element that allowed that success. I think success in science, at least as far as I'm concerned, and based on my experience across 3 continents and 3 hemispheres across the world, is 5 pillars. The first is education and training. I think you need to make sure that you have the right education. You need to attend the right courses. You need to attend the right seminar. You need to tick a box of in critical training event in the world, because your CV sometimes is judged based on that. The second important pillar below education and training is probably your research niche. It is critical that early you need to know clearly what you want to do in terms of focusing your career. I think a research niche needs to be an area that excites you. It needs to be something that allows you to wake up early and to sleep very late without complaining. And there are 3 ways, to my view, to choose a research need. The first thing is to choose an area that matters. And for example, the way I chose to work on sickle cell disease, I thought I want to make a difference on the African continent. And I chose the genetic condition as a geneticist that is the most common, that is the most severe, that is the most specific. You may apply the same principle for infectious disease that may allow you to work on malaria or on HIV or on TB, depending on where you want to operate. And another way of choosing a niche is to navigate on available opportunity. There's nothing wrong to be opportunistic. I remember in the early days when I wanted to work on sickle cell, my mentor at the time advised against it because he told me that I would struggle to have funding, because in the research system at the time, about 20 years ago, most people would consider that sickle cell issue was solved. And he advised to work on cardiovascular condition. That was the topic at the top of the agenda at the time. And you remain a topic at the top of the agenda. Nothing stopped you to say, okay, this is the topic that is the most sexy. Now I would like to work on it. But you can also combine your interests with the opportunity. So for example, at the time, I thought cardiovascular complications in sickle cell disease may be an area that may allow to open doors for the opportunity. And I'm still working on those areas. The third possibility of choosing beside relevance and opportunism is personal history. Sometimes you don't need to choose a topic, but that topic chose you to work on. I work on genetic of hearing loss. I never thought I would work on it until I have a personal history in my own family with person that was born with hearing impairment. And that sparked my interest. And I still working on it because by looking for answer for myself, I wanted to provide answer for others. So the research need is important. It is a critical element that you need to do. The third thing is the ecosystem. You need to understand the environment where you work. Understanding the ecosystem is understanding the policy ecosystem. Who are the funders? Who are the national funders? Who are the international funders? Of course, the funders that are interested on what you are interested on. Understanding the ecosystem is understanding the way funding schemes are advertised, the way they are reviewed. For example, the most important document for NIH funding is the specific M. That's by far the most important document. If you get your specific N wrong, you are not going to get that funding. You need to understand how it is reviewed, how the committee meet, how the committee votes, and how the committee that judge funding finalize their funding decision. You need to know exactly those steps, because those steps allow you to shape your story in such a way that you have a best light on your research ideas. Similarly, if you are writing for the Wellcome Trust, it's important to liaise, you told that already, get those funding to get the networking right. And that's why I understand by ecosystem. You are networking, you do it by attending meetings. Because some of those decisions, some of the best information, you are not going to get it online. You are going to get it by talking to people at meetings, and you have to be intentional. So if you are attending the international conference on next week, have a list of people that you want to meet to talk to. Liaise with them before, because you are not going to liaise to them randomly. Many people are extremely busy. That's what I say. Networking is important. Ecosystem is also the journals in which you want to publish, because the work that you do have to be visible. And if you don't have that visibility in terms of publication in your CV, you are not going to be funded, because most funding decisions start with the investigator. And the investigator is run by his capacity of doing that research, and that is measured by publication, that is measured by the number of fellowship you had before, that is measured by other grant that you have, that is measured by your networking. Understanding the ecosystem is to be a good citizen. A good citizen is not just to go to meeting, and is being part of professional society and take roles in those professional society. Taking a role in those professional society allow people to put a name to your face, allow people to judge your capacity, organizing capacity, because the very same people you meet in those society are the same people that will review your paper, are the same people that will review your grant. And it's important that people already have a positive light on your capacity of doing research, on your capacity of doing science, on your capacity of presenting science. And again, being knowing the ecosystem as well is to commit. So it's not just to sit there and do nothing, but every single time to be a positive contributor to science, not just in journal, scientific journal, but in a general public. The fourth pillar is resilience and consistency. You need to have a resilience system around you. And that resilience system is made by, to my view, at least the thing that have worked for me, 5 things. The first is the mentors. You need to have someone that you can talk to confidently, that will criticize you objectively and make you grow. You can choose your mentor from time to time, one that is in your area. I think some people may call them sponsors, and one that may not be in your area. And sometimes mentorship is organic. Mentorship is someone that I had, for example, 2 major mentors in my scientific career. One that is my direct trainer, I will call him rather a sponsor, Dr. Silanos Antonoakis. The second one that was not at all in my field. He was a professor of pathology. I randomly met him in a conference, and I think he was having extremely influential. He's no more from this world, but I'm still having a good relation with his family that remained behind. So the mentor is someone that you see also privately that is able to guide you not only in your science direction, but also because of his experience to say, these are the things that you need to do to achieve the next level. The second thing in the resilience and consistency is the domestic arrangement. If you have a husband, a wife, a partner in life, know that that person is one of your strongest resilience system, part of your strongest resilience system, because you're going to get the ups and downs. I think Segun said the success rate usually is around 10%. And every single time you are in the 90%, you are depressed. So you have someone that will be around you that lift you up without breaking you down. And that person is your husband, that person is your wife. So cherish those relations, cherish everybody around you that are part of your resilience. Sometimes it's your children, and sometimes it's just your friends. The third element of resilience is peer support. Within the field that you have, you need to have very, very good friends and build that friendship. It's not just around science, it's around you and all your colleagues with whom you have a certain relation. Being able to call them at any single time, they should be able to come to you and you should be able to go to them. The third element of resilience is collaboration. You have to have good friends and good collaborators across the world, not just in your area, but across the world. Again, everything's are tied together. Those collaborations, you build them through professional society. Sometimes you build them through your training cohort, people that you met at the time you were doing your training. And in another element for consistency and resilience for me is generosity in science. You need to give your knowledge away all the time. You need to train students. I don't remember the last time I drafted a paper myself, an article myself. And last year in my research group, we published 38 articles. You can check on PubMed. So how can we publish 38 articles in a single year? It's just because we have built a system of peer support, giving what we think we know to everybody around us, train a lot of people that actually are the people that draft the article, and you take the time to correct and to get them out. Not only you increase your profile, but you train the people that support the support based on what we want to do. That's what I call generosity. I think my good friend Bongani Maosi, peace to his soul, call it lift as you rise. Every single time you are going up, bring with you a lot of people. Those people are element of your resilience as well. So they are not just there to work for you as a collaborator. So, and the last thing to my view is being human. I think you need to be a good human being. You need to have an ethical conduct, because I think people say in some area of research that you only eat what you hunt, but it doesn't mean that you need to eat everybody around you. You need to be really have an ethical conduct. You need to engage. Engaging for me means doing science like not doing something like the world around you doesn't exist. I think in the past couple of years, for example, there have been an issue of racism in science. Take a voice and speak it out. It's a risk sometimes because some people don't like to hear that, but say it. If you don't say it, you pretend not to be living in a world where you should have a voice. I remember in early days, 15 years ago, when the issue of Caster Semenya came out, I probably wrote one of the most influential paper of my career. That was to say we are not able to use genetic for gender testing. We are not educated enough because the complexity of disorder of sex development do not allow us to do so. And those are what I call engaging the society around you. Engaging for me is being grateful all the time. Remember, sometimes we complain, but there are many people that are not fortunate to be in our position. And I'm just being grateful that make your life much more easier. You are less cynical, and you are more positive in the way you embrace life. And that are element of being human. And again, giving back is also not only giving back to the student and to the trainee, giving back to the community that allow your science to happen. Have a good relation with your research participant. Invite your research participant to meeting. Invite them as part of your collaborating group. That's what we do in our research. That's what we do in our research in hearing impairment. That's what we do in our research with sickle cell disease. For example, in our research in hearing impairment, for at least 5 years, we actually recruited 2 patients or 2 colleagues that were actually deaf, because you cannot engage in one specific issue if you don't even know the challenge of those people. So those are the 5 major pillars that I think is critical if we want to be successful in science, being educated and trained in the right way, choosing a research need that excites you, have a resilient system and being consistent around, have an ecosystem and networking that can operate for you, and being at the end a good human being. And I would like now to thank everybody that allowed this event to happen, starting with Vicky, the convener, and officially the secretary of the African Society of Human Genetics. I would like to thank Jürgen, Hada, Segun, Michelle, and Hannah for their participation. I would like to thank all of you for your kind attention, and see you next week in Cape Town.
Thank you very much, dear Ambroise. I tricked you into presenting yourself to steal 1 minute from your time. Thank you very much for sharing your very, very important experience. I know how many grants you had, how many grants you wrote, and I would quote some of your words, which I think as extremely important. We have to stick to ethical conduct. We have to be collaborative. We have to network. We have to be, above all, generous and lift as you rise. Really, I love those words. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hada. I'll see you next week.
Thank you. See you next week. Thank you all. We'll answer the questions online because we are so past the time. Thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much for all presenters and panelists, because I think this course was, I hope you all benefited from it, as I myself benefited from it. Thank you again. Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, the organizers. Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.